Hi, I'm Perianne Boring. I'm the founder and CEO of the Digital Chamber. We are the leading policy organization for the Bitcoin and the blockchain community, headquartered in Washington, D.C. We work with policymakers to try to move this industry and this technology forward. And today I'm doing an analysis of Robert Kennedy Jr.'s speech at the Bitcoin conference in Nashville. I'm going to play a couple clips, help you understand what these policy proposals are that he's proposing, and understand how they'll impact the industry, and also how they measure up to what other candidates spoke at the Bitcoin conference, as everyone is gearing up for election season this year. Mr. Kennedy comes out with a pretty strong start. So let's play the first clip.
I intend, as President of the United States, to sign an executive order on day one, directing the Department of Justice and the U.S. Marshals to transfer the approximately 200,000 Bitcoin held by the U.S. government to the United States Treasury, where it will be held as a strategic asset. On day one as president, I will sign another executive order directing the U.S. Treasury to purchase 550 Bitcoin daily until the U.S. has built a reserve of at least 4 million Bitcoins and a position of dominance that no other country will be able to usurp. Our nation holds approximately 19% of global gold reserves. This policy will give us about the same proportion of total Bitcoin. The cascading impact from these actions will eventually move Bitcoin to a valuation of hundreds of trillions of dollars. On day one as president, I will sign also an executive order directing the IRS to issue public guidelines that all transactions between Bitcoin and the U.S. dollar are unreportable transactions and by extension, non-taxable.
All right, just to summarize, this is the most bullish policy proposal ever proposed by a candidate ever, presidential candidate, congressional candidate. This literally beats everybody. We could probably just stop the entire speech right now and give Kennedy the award for the most bullish Bitcoin and digital asset candidate the world has ever seen. And he calls for some very, very big things here. So let's break them down. The first one is holding Bitcoin as a strategic asset. So as you're probably aware, the U.S. government, and actually a number of governments around the world, have acquired digital assets through law enforcement efforts. So it's very, very easy to track and trace all transactions on a blockchain. This is one of kind of the misconceptions. We hear a lot about Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies with working with policymakers. People say, well, isn't this the currency that illicit actors are using? And the answer is, well, yes, but only the non-sophisticated ones. If you're trying to conceal your transactions, if you're involved in something illegal or unsavory and you want to hide those tracks, probably the dumbest thing you can do is put those transactions on an unalterable public ledger. So law enforcement has been extremely effective, particularly here in the United States, at tracking down criminals that are using the Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies and have been able to apprehend criminals and seize those assets. And we have a very large stockpile of those today. The U.S. government is one of the largest holders of Bitcoin in the world because they've confiscated so much through law enforcement actions. According to Mr. Kennedy, the U.S. government currently has about 200,000 Bitcoin. And what he is saying is that we will move that from the law enforcement's hands. I think most of it's with the U.S. Marshal Service and the Department of Justice, but move that into a strategic reserve. This is the same thing that Trump had called for. His delivery was really funny. If you didn't watch it, I definitely recommend hearing how Trump positioned this as well. But he said the number one rule of Bitcoin is never sell your Bitcoin, and we shouldn't do that either. But the point is the same. We have Bitcoin. We've acquired it through law enforcement efforts. Let's save that for a strategic asset. Let's not sell those Bitcoin. And that's important because the state of Germany just sold all of its Bitcoin, which many, including myself, see as a very strategic mistake. Nations, this is the best performing asset class in the world. We should use this to strengthen the U.S. dollar and other fiat currencies. So that was bullet point number one. Don't sell the Bitcoin we already have. Bullet point number two was he says, let's direct the Treasury to purchase an additional 4 million Bitcoin. This goes a huge step further than what Trump did. So Trump kind of just stopped at let's not sell our Bitcoin. So Kennedy's really pushing in and saying let's buy more. And he picked the number 4 million. Why did he pick the number 4 million? Well, I actually had the opportunity to speak with Mr. Kennedy himself before the conference and after the conference, as well as his team that helped prepare his speech. And there was a lot of debate between picking that number of 4 million. I think they originally started with the number of 1 million. So what was the difference? To really understand the difference, you need to watch Michael Saylor's talk that he gave at the Bitcoin conference as well. I met with Michael right before he went on stage at the Bitcoin conference, and what he told me, he said out of every talk he's ever given, and he's been buying Bitcoin for over 4 years now, he said, this talk that I'm giving today, I've spent more time preparing for it than any talk I've ever given in my life. And he laid out a very interesting, new and novel valuation approach to Bitcoin. How do we value Bitcoin in the long term? And one of the things that he said is that if you want to be for a nation state that wants to lead in the Bitcoin space, there's not room for many nations to do so because there's only 21 million Bitcoin that exist, that will ever exist. So there's kind of a cap. So there's just not a lot of space for many nation states to have a dominant or majority position of Bitcoin. And that number, that 4 million number, is closer to what Michael Saylor had laid out in his his new and novel valuation models for Bitcoin. But as Kennedy said, today we own about 19% of the global gold reserves, and that brings us to a somewhat similar proportion of Bitcoin. And that this would move Bitcoin to a valuation of hundreds of trillions of dollars. Again, for me, in my role in the Bitcoin and the crypto space, it's much less about the opportunity to that number to go up, the opportunity for to make money in this space. It's more that this is an alternative asset class, and an alternative monetary system that's very, very different than the fiat system that will add tremendous value to the current system. And is that, as an American, to have a stockpile, a significant stockpile of Bitcoin, which would, I guess, he doesn't say he's going to necessarily back the dollar with Bitcoin, but it does position the United States to be a leader in Bitcoin globally. But I do think having these types of reserves will preserve American prosperity for future generations. And we have a very significant debt crisis here in the United States. To me, as a millennial and of the younger generation, I think this is one of the biggest issues the younger generations will be inheriting. And this adds a lot of hope on how can we overcome these significant debt issues that we're saddling the younger generations with. But then he doesn't stop there. He then went on to say that transactions between Bitcoin and US dollar would be unreportable transactions and also non-taxable. So what does that mean? It means if you are a holder of Bitcoin today and you sold your Bitcoin, so you transfer it into US dollars, that transaction would not be reportable or taxable. That's also really, really critical to unlocking Bitcoin, to make it the acceptance and the use of Bitcoin, and to get it into the hands of all people. It's extremely punitive to sell your Bitcoin. It's extremely punitive to use your Bitcoin as a currency, to use it for payment, because of the way the IRS treats it. So this would also put the U.S. on par with many other nations around the world. Many other countries tax cryptocurrencies, including Bitcoin, as a currency. So this would allow us to have a stronger tax position globally. It would also take away that punitive tax policy of using Bitcoin for transactions and make it usable as a currency here in the United States.
For optimism, for independence, for democracy and transparency, it is the currency of hope. It is the perfect currency. It is an elegant, poetic, beautiful, pure species that aligns perfectly with the highest ideals and aspirations represented by the American experiment with self-governance. It is incorruptible. It has integrity. It has self-sovereignty. It promotes personal responsibility and accountability. It is decentralized and democratic. It is small on government and large on personal freedom. Bitcoin is anti-war. It is a fierce, merciless, and insurmountable foe of government corruption. And transactional freedom was as important as freedom of expression in the First Amendment. And if a government is able to starve you, to evict you from your home, if you speak out against it, if you criticize government policies, then we are on the road to totalitarianism and slavery. I would fight to ensure the right to self-custody Bitcoin, to run nodes in our own homes, to stop the federal government from usurping the First Amendment rights to open source, privacy-enhancing technologies. I pledge to prevent government officials from adopting CBDCs, which would inevitably morph into what we saw in Canada, a malevolent tool for surveillance and control. Most importantly, I promise to secure the United States' position as the global hub of cryptocurrency innovation and entrepreneurship and investment and technology.
All right, these next couple clips, and I cut them up just so you could get through it a little bit faster, but I think we captured the main points here. The first one, Mr. Kennedy talks about how Bitcoin represents American values, and he very eloquently talks about a number of the features of how this technology works. He says it's a technology for freedom, a technology for independence. It's a currency of hope. He says it's the perfect currency, and it's anti-war. So I strongly believe what he's saying and agree with what he's saying. And the reason why I've been drawn in and dedicated my career to helping protect and grow this currency here in the United States is because it's a total open and equal system for all people to participate in. I do think it's a technology for freedom. Everyone can use the blockchain, and everyone is equal on the blockchain. It doesn't matter how old you are, where you come from, where you live, what you look like, your gender, how you identify as gender. None of that matters. We are all equal on chain. And I think that's one of the highest American values, really just human values, that the blockchain truly offers. And I love that Robert Kennedy really recognized that and was able to take the features of the blockchain and share how this represents our values as the center of the free world. The second clip, he said, he talks about transaction freedom. So Mr. Kennedy, and he spoke at the Bitcoin conference last year. So if you want to watch the talk from last year and then rewatch it again, but he very quickly kind of rehashed what he talked about the year before. The way that he became an advocate and a strong proponent for Bitcoin was through the trucker movement in Canada. And it's funny because I literally just came back from Canada yesterday, where I was with the community there. But during the COVID pandemic, there were all these strikes, and a number of people who participated in the strikes, particularly truckers, they were monitored by the government, and then they were able to figure out exactly who they were and then shut off their bank accounts. And that some people ended up, if you don't have the ability to access your money, how do you pay your rent? How do you pay? You have alimony. He said there was a trucker who was going to jail because he couldn't access his funds and he couldn't pay mandatory alimony. How do you pay for your rent? How do you take care of yourself? How do you take care of your family? So not being able to access your money, that transaction freedom, is just as important as the First Amendment, which I agree with as well. And in fact, I would say the ability to use and have access to open source software is protected under the First Amendment. At its core, cryptocurrency is open source software. That's what it is. In software language, open source software code is protected under the free speech here in the United States. That has gone to court. You can reference the Bernstein case for that. And any ability or any government that wants to restrict our access to cryptocurrencies or any other open source technology would be hindering our First Amendment rights. And that's exactly the point that Mr. Kennedy is making here.
I got a big check from the fees from winning the Monsanto case. And I took most of that check, which represented the largest portion of my personal wealth, and I invested it all in Bitcoin. Now, I'm very happy to learn that I'm not the only one talking about Bitcoin in this year's election. Nothing could make me more joyful than to see other political leaders now jumping on the Bitcoin bandwagon. I've had over a year's head start to study, to understand, to articulate the potential of Bitcoin. And my goal as the first Bitcoin president will be to enact policies that will make America the world's greatest representative for Bitcoin and a proponent of its democratic values.
All right, in these next two clips, what we are hearing is Mr. Kennedy's personal story with Bitcoin and his personal experience with Bitcoin. So we're getting to hear a little bit about who he is. And what he's really divulging is that he is a Bitcoiner. He didn't get into the full details, but he won a case against Monsanto about a year ago. And I believe he was awarded $290 million. You can look that up online. Don't quote me on that, but something significant, something around that. And he said that was the majority of it represents the majority of his net worth. When I had researched Kennedy myself, when I first started following him, was about a year ago, and I've spent many hours over the past year learning about who he is as a person, who he is as a presidential candidate, who he is as a politician. And this Monsanto case was one that I found extremely impressive. And I would encourage everyone to spend a little bit of time to just study who he is, who he's been throughout his life. Mr. Kennedy, of course, started his life in an extremely difficult way, both his father and his uncle were assassinated, of which he witnessed both of their deaths. He was at a very young age. He then struggled with drug addiction. He came out of that. Anybody who has been through addiction, or anyone who loves someone who has been through addiction, this is something I've personally seen in my own family. You know how hard it is to overcome drug addictions, substance abuse addictions. And there are hundreds of thousands of people who have died just in the past several years from this, and many, many more that struggle with it. And he's walked those very, very hard steps, and he overcame that. And then he went on to become a lawyer, and he went to some of the best institutions and studied law. And I'm not a lawyer. I did not go to law school, but I have many, many, many friends and colleagues that are, and you know that that's not an easy career path to choose. And then after graduating law school, he went into practicing law, and he has taken on some extremely, very difficult cases. If you know anything about Monsanto, with just a few minutes of researching that company, you will quickly understand that they're one of the most powerful businesses globally. They have, this is the company that created Roundup and the pesticides that come along with it. He represented one of the workers that sprayed pesticides on crops. That person developed cancer, and through the litigation, he was able to hold Monsanto accountable for that. And if you just look back at his legal career, he's done many other cases holding corporations accountable for pollution and environmental harms. And I think these are the types of people that we want in office. We don't want career politicians in office. I'm a very strong believer in term limits. Being a career or being a politician should not be a career choice in any country, but especially here in the United States. And Mr. Kennedy is someone who's lived a real life as an American, who's had a real career, who's stood up for American people who have been harmed, and has been successful doing that. And that's one of the reasons why I'm so supportive of Mr. Kennedy running for office, because I believe he is the type of person we need, and we need more people like Mr. Kennedy in office. So he won quite a bit of money from that case, hundreds of millions of dollars, and he said he invested it all in Bitcoin. So that means that Mr. Kennedy is himself a Bitcoiner. He is one of us, which is why he is the most bullish Bitcoin and crypto politician that's running, or candidate that's running for president this year, because he's not just running on a pro Bitcoin platform. He's actually a part of our community himself, and that's what he was sharing in these comments. And then I also grabbed the clip of him alluding to, essentially Donald Trump. That's what he's talking about here. He said, I'm happy to learn that I'm not the only one running for office that's talking about Bitcoin. And I just thought this was such a gracious way to acknowledge the fact that there were other presidential candidates on stage, that Donald Trump was there as well, without getting into any nasty argument. He didn't criticize Mr. Trump in any way. And I think we've as a country, we've just really suffered from having this toxic political environment. We've got a two-party system. Both sides really seem to hate each other. And going into the elections, like, our country has just become so divided. And I think so many people are just sick of it. I myself, there are many Republicans and Democrats that I've supported over my life. There's things about the Republican Party that I like and I dislike. There's things about the Democrat Party that I like and I dislike. But ultimately, I support people all across the aisle that I think represent my values. And I think not engaging in that political discourse, to really just stick to the issues, and just be respectful of other people who are running in office or running against you. I think that showed and displayed a lot of character, and I very much appreciated that of Kennedy's remarks. All right, let's go to the next clip.
I have a plan to strengthen the U.S. dollar and lower the interest rates and neutralize our $34 trillion debt by backing U.S. Treasury bills, notes, and bonds with hard assets, including a combination of precious metals and Bitcoin. 6 months before his assassination, my uncle President John F. Kennedy, signed an executive order that put silver coins in competition with the notes issued by the Fed. His intention was to rein in Fed discretion. He had been a critic of Fed policy, and he hoped to end the discretionary monetary policy and the inevitable debasement of the U.S. dollar. Notably, after my uncle's assassination, the government immediately stopped issuing those silver coins, and power returned to the Fed.
All right, in this next clip, Mr. Kennedy is explaining a policy proposal that he proposed a couple of months ago to back U.S. Treasury debt with Bitcoin. He spoke at a virtual event. You'll have to search that online to watch the whole thing. But from memory, essentially what he had outlined previously was a 100-year plan. Year one, the U.S. Treasury bonds would have issued 99% backed by U.S. dollars, 1% backed by a basket of hard assets, which would include Bitcoin, but other hard assets like gold and silver, platinum, and I think palladium. Again, you'll need to watch that previous speech to see the full details of it. He did not share them again at the Bitcoin conference, but it's a 100-year plan. So year one, back at 1% with hard assets, year two, 2% with hard assets, year three, so on and so forth. And he talks about why we need to do this. So for anyone who, most people in the Bitcoin community have studied Austrian economics and understand that in the fiat system, which was designed by Keynesian economists, there's nothing backing current fiat currencies today. These are currencies that are issued by governments, and they're just backed by the full faith and credit of the government, but there's nothing hard behind them. For thousands of years, civilizations around the world have used things of scarcity as currency or for bartering. This idea of fiat currency, just having something with really nothing behind it except a government IOU, is something we've only been on for a couple of decades. This officially started in 1971 when President Nixon closed the gold closed the gold window, which took us off the gold standard, meaning foreign governments could no longer take their U.S. dollars and trade it for gold at the U.S. Treasury. You just have that government backing IOU. And by the 80s, all industrialized nations had moved to fiat currency, meaning nothing backed by gold. And again, for thousands of years, we've been on gold and silver standards. The United States was founded on a gold and silver standard. We transitioned off of that. It really wasn't that long ago. And this experiment has not been going so well. If you just look at a couple of measures of the health of our economy here in the United States, but also in many other nations around the world, inflation has really gotten out of hand. I know for a lot of young people, inflation has really impacted young people's ability to have just a normal standard of living. People are having to work more hours. It's harder to get by. The cost of everything is going up, whether that's your gas or your groceries or your rent or your mortgage or whatever. And wages are not keeping pace with these rising prices. So this is a very interesting plan to help rein in inflation and rein in what he called Fed discretion. And then he talks about this historical story, this very, very powerful moment in American history where his uncle, John Kennedy, was assassinated. And he talked about right before he was assassinated, he had these silver coins were issued to put in competition with the Fed. And notably, after his assassination, those silver coins were then taken out of circulation and power returned back to the Fed. So what Mr. Kennedy is proposing here is, probably a little bit dangerous, very, very somewhat radical, but ultimately in the interest of the people. Make our money hard again, make our money valuable again, get us back to a hard money system, which is what America was founded on, and put an end to all this debt that's being racked up on the backs of young Americans, rein in inflation, and restore us to financial prosperity.
Critics of Bitcoin have wrongly cast it as an environmental threat because of its high energy demand. The opposite, of course, is true. Bitcoin miners are more sensitive to energy pricing than any other industry. This means that they can only survive in the marketplace by utilizing the cheapest energy, and that invariably means waste energy and surplus power. For example, methane from landfills would otherwise go into the atmosphere, but Bitcoin miners are uniquely able to harness it as an energy source. Bitcoin mining is also the ideal partner for renewable energy and variable power projects like wind and solar. Inflation, as we all know, is theft, and it's almost always theft from the poor. The Fed has engineered an uber-efficient money printing machine to perpetrate the systematic robbery that has gutted the American middle class and decimated America's working poor. The obscene money printing has drained our citizens of their purchasing power through the hidden tax of inflation. And it was the Trump and Biden administration's reckless embrace of money printing that have pushed the middle class over the tipping point now.
All right, in this segment of Mr. Kennedy's talk, we are now getting into energy policy. Energy policy is a big part of Bitcoin policy because, of course, you need energy to mine Bitcoin, to run the blockchain, to harness and secure the Bitcoin network. And a large part of Bitcoin mining is happening here in the United States. We have a very, very robust and competitive Bitcoin mining industry. We represent a number of these entities here at the Digital Chamber, and we have dealt with firsthand all of the criticism that has come from environmental groups saying Bitcoin is bad for the environment because it uses energy. So it was very refreshing to hear Mr. Kennedy say the exact opposite is true of what the environmental groups or what the media may lead you to believe. And this is exactly what we've been preaching here at the Digital Chamber in our digital power network that works exclusively on energy policy for the Bitcoin space. One of the things he talked about was methane. Methane mitigation has been really, this technology has been pioneered by the Bitcoin mining community. Particularly using with flare gas. Some of the biggest oil and gas companies in the world, at times they have to flare. That puts a lot of very toxic chemicals into the environment. You can put a box on top of the flare, capture that, turn it into a source that can be used to mine Bitcoin, and some of the biggest oil and gas companies in the entire country are doing just that today. And then he says this is an ideal, Bitcoin miners are an ideal partner for renewables. So if you are for a more sustainable energy future and you want to see a transition to more sustainable and renewable energy sources, you are for Bitcoin mining. And Mr. Kennedy talked about how Bitcoin mining companies are serving as a financial power center to renewable energy sources to build out new renewable plants around the country and the world. And that is exactly what we're seeing in the industry. Mr. Kennedy, you get an A+ on your energy policy, Bitcoin energy policy. You clearly do understand how Bitcoin mining works and how it integrates into our energy systems here in the United States. All right, next topic.
Americans today are being forced to make these gut-wrenching decisions because our money is broken. Bitcoin is the off-ramp from the inflation highway of doom. If the world were on a Bitcoin standard and our money held its value, we would all have the ability to live more abundant lives. Bitcoiners have it right. Fix the money, fix the world. The discipline of tying our dollars to hard assets like Bitcoin will also finally break our addiction to forever wars. Fiat currency was invented to fund war. Prior to fiat currency, when a country ran out of money, the war would end. Or if a government wanted to fund a war, it would issue war bonds and borrow the money from its citizens, or it would tell them in advance, we're going to tax you. Today, governments don't need to even ask that permission. They just print the money. If the world was on a Bitcoin standard, then there would be no war because the governments can't print Bitcoin. I'm a proponent of Bitcoin because it can defund the military-industrial complex. Oh, let me say it again. If governments couldn't print money with a couple of keystrokes on a computer, they wouldn't be able to fund wars that never end. Again, fix the money, fix the world.
Okay, here in this next series of clips, and I clipped up a number of things, but Mr. Kennedy spoke for a solid 10 minutes on inflation. And it's very clear that Mr. Kennedy actually understands where inflation comes from and exactly what it is. There has been a lot of, changes in economic theory, in the ways that we discuss inflation, the ways that we define inflation. A lot of things that we see today when people talk about inflation, what they're really talking about is prices rising, the prices of gas going up, the prices of groceries going up. That's not really what I would consider inflation. And the official measurement of inflation in the United States is the CPI index, or the Consumer Price Index. And again, I would argue that's not exactly what inflation is. Inflation is an expansion of the monetary base, and then prices rising is a symptom of that. And Mr. Kennedy clearly understands the difference between the two, because you can't actually address the issue of rising prices if you don't correctly identify why they're rising. Why do you think prices are rising? It's because we're expanding the monetary base. It's because we're printing money out of thin air. And he had a lot of really good zingers in there. I also included the little criticism of both Trump and Biden. And I thought it was fair to include that because he is correct. Both the Trump administration and the Biden administration have been massive money printers. And I think it's right to call that out. And then he takes all of this and connects it to the war machine and forever wars in the military-industrial complex. He talked a lot about American history, and the whole reason why fiat currency was created was to fund wars, and why this is, probably unconstitutional. So again, what Mr. Kennedy is proposing in his Bitcoin policy speech is something that's pretty radical. I don't think it should be considered radical because it's really just taking us back to the values that we were established on. We have gotten so far away from that over the past 100 years. And he's someone who's not trying to protect that machine, but rather break it down and restore us to the way it was always meant to be. And I think this is something that takes a lot of courage to call for. There's very, very, very few candidates who are going this far. Really, the last one was Dr. Ron Paul, who also ran for president maybe 15 years ago, a number of years ago. Dr. Paul was, famously, called for to abolish the Federal Reserve altogether. And now we have Mr. Kennedy, who's calling for very significant reforms to really rein in this money printing, and really understanding how devastating and how much devastation that money printing has caused to Americans, particularly the poor, and has been funding forever wars for forever. All right, we'll go to the next step.
And make no mistake, one of the main reasons my administration will fix our broken money is to defund the war machine. To reach that goal, I'm going to support making direct ownership of Bitcoin tax-free. The conversion of Bitcoin back into dollars will be non-reportable transaction to the IRS and not subject to capital gains. When U.S. citizens are required to report every Bitcoin transaction to the IRS, the government knows everything that we are doing with our money. Governments have no business knowing your business. Direct ownership of Bitcoin keeps it decentralized. And that is the only way to prevent BlackRock and other global asset managers from having undue influence over the Bitcoin network, over its forks, and over its upgrades. I'm telling you today that I will never, ever sign a law that taxes direct ownership of Bitcoin. Tax-free Bitcoin is not only critical for citizens' financial autonomy, freedom, and privacy, it is essential to keep it decentralized and democratic as Satoshi created it to be.
All right. I feel like I need to be really honest about where we are and where I just mentally am as we're breaking down Mr. Kennedy's speech kind of segment by segment. And I honestly feel like nothing I say is going to truly give this speech justice. You really need to just watch it yourself. It is a very, very thoughtful speech. I'm personally learning things from Mr. Kennedy as he talks. He's very educated on the topic. He really understands the policy, and the way he is discussing his proposed tax policy for Bitcoin just really demonstrates a very advanced understanding of the challenges Bitcoin is facing in U.S. regulatory and tax policy. So in this segment, he again is revisiting making Bitcoin transactions tax-free. So he's made a campaign promise that if you convert Bitcoin into U.S. dollars, that will not be taxed. And also it will not be subject to any type of government reporting. He shares why he believes this is important to protect the Fourth Amendment, that right to privacy. If the government has, significant amounts of data on everything we're doing with our money, how can we truly have privacy? And he makes a good point, but he's actually going even further than that. Beyond just protecting our right to privacy, he's also saying we need to protect Bitcoin and keep it decentralized as Satoshi intended it to be. One of the biggest things have happened this year for Bitcoin is, of course, the introduction of spot Bitcoin ETFs. I've called this Bitcoin's IPO moment because it's Bitcoin now available. You can buy access to Bitcoin through the public markets, and we have the biggest firms on Wall Street all offering ETF products, Bitcoin products to their clients. And is there a risk to a company like BlackRock having huge amounts of ownership of Bitcoin on behalf of their clients? That's the question he's really asking and raising with the community. And he's the first person to really raise this, at least the first candidate or public policymaker to raise this issue. So, of course, if you are an owner, and this is exactly what Kennedy said, probably even better than I'm breaking it down, but if you own an ETF, a spot Bitcoin ETF, that is a security. That product is a security, and securities are subject to capital gains. So you are buying Bitcoin from an issuer. They hold the Bitcoin on your behalf. And then you have, that investment product with that you've invested in. That's very different than buying Bitcoin directly and holding it directly. That's not a security. Owning it at that level, at the individual level, you have a commodity, and commodities are still subject to capital gains. But what he's saying is that it should not be, because it will encourage people to own it directly, so we don't have a big centralization risk on Wall Street, and that will protect the decentralization of Bitcoin and wouldn't allow any one institution to have too much power or influence over the Bitcoin network. So this is definitely a tax policy I could get behind. And he's made a campaign promise that this is what he intends to do.
Bitcoin guarantees property rights. With freely transactable Bitcoin, no government will be able to confiscate or tax your wealth at the border. This is another example of Bitcoin's potency as a weapon against totalitarianism. Bitcoin is about something much bigger. Bitcoin is about our souls. It's about our values. The price go up feature is the least of all of its attributes. Bitcoin is the currency of freedom, the currency of liberty, the currency of hope. It restores self-sovereignty back to the individual, which is the whole purpose of American democracy. It gives us digital property rights, which is the core of our democracy. And it provides a store of value that will allow middle-class Americans to live in abundance again. I want to be the president who can bring back hope. And I'm grateful to be part of your Bitcoin community. In fact, I don't think of myself as red. I don't think of myself as blue, and I don't even think of myself as purple. Those are the colors of the political parties. Instead, I think of myself as orange.
These are the concluding thoughts and comments from Robert Kennedy Jr. at his speech at the Bitcoin conference. And I love that he positions Bitcoin as a message of hope. Especially as a member of the younger generation, as a millennial, we are inheriting a lot of issues. Our country has a lot of problems, whether it's the debt crisis, the forever wars, the issues at the border, the issues we have with inflation, just this huge divide. We have massive polarization across our country. I mean, we are facing a number of challenges, and he really well articulated, if we fix the money, we can fix the world, because so many of the challenges we face come back to having a corrupted currency that funds forever wars where inflation is theft, and it just creates a cascade of problems that have all built up over the past several decades. So that message of hope, I think, was very, it resonated very strongly with me. But I think with so many other people across the country, that there is hope for something better. And Bitcoin is a tool to help us get there. In conclusion, I think Robert Kennedy Jr. is the authentic Bitcoin president. He truly believes in this technology. He's really demonstrated his understanding of the technology. He's clearly done a deep study of what are the policy issues impacting the adoption of this technology, impacting the further growth and investment and development of this technology here in the United States. And he's really committed to breaking down some of those big barriers for Bitcoin here in the United States. If you enjoyed this talk, I definitely recommend you watch the full thing from Kennedy himself. Again, I've done my best to provide my analysis of it, but he really does a very good job of explaining his position in detail. And I would watch the full thing. Bitcoin Magazine posted it for free on YouTube. And then I've also done a full analysis of former President Trump's speech at the Bitcoin conference as well, just to kind of compare both of those. Kennedy goes a lot further than Trump did. Trump did lay out a very positive message for the Bitcoin community. He made a number of campaign promises as well, but Kennedy's gone a lot further in those promises. Thank you so much for watching this video. And again, I'm Perianne Boring, the CEO of the Digital Chamber.